You are listening to part 14 of our 20-part series, Marvelous Mints, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Wade at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan. Welcome back to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. Did you have a good week with Tulsi?
We did, and I was just so fascinated by our discussion of Tulsi. There are so many magnificent herbs out there, but I'm thinking that should be number one on my list to start cultivating and working with more than what I do.
Well, we have seen how each one of these marvelous mints is definitely a member of the family. And then once we understand what the family does, that they can indeed be used very interchangeably. But like all members of large families, they do have their unique uses. This week, I want to talk about Shiso, which is Perilla frutescens. In Chinese, it's Aogiso. Japanese is Shiso. English is beefsteak plant. In Korea, it's Knip Nul. And in Vietnam, it's Tito, which is a lot like Shiso, isn't it? I like the Japanese name for it, Shiso. Beefsteak plant, I don't know, it just seems a little kind of appalling for a very beautiful plant. I got my first Shiso seeds from a correspondence course student of mine who was a Japanese student. And she sent me the Shiso seeds with a note and said, "We use this plant in Japan to get through the long, hard winters. Plant it, and it will naturalize, and you will have it forever, so long as you let it go to seed every year." Well, I didn't know very much about gardening, so it turns out that was pretty good. I just scattered those Shiso seeds when she sent them to me, which was in the autumn. If I had waited until the spring, they probably wouldn't have sprouted. Shiso seeds, although the Shiso plant doesn't grow in the cold, and the leaves fall from the plants as soon as it starts to get even like the first breath of cold, nonetheless, the seeds must be cold treated in order to germinate. So if you wind up buying Shiso seeds, and I suspect that you might after you hear about all the wonderful things that Shiso can do, before you plant them, put them in the freezer, or buy them now and throw them out. Yes, even on the winter soil. It's okay. The best thing for helping Shiso to germinate is to make sure it is not covered. The seeds need to actually be struck by the sunlight in order to germinate. So once again, as a novice gardener, I just pretty much lucked out. I got sent some seeds, I threw them down on the ground and walked away, and that was exactly what needed to happen. Was the Shiso seeds need to be thrown down in a sunny place where they could be frozen over the winter. Shiso, like the Tulsi, comes in both green and purple. But Shiso then has a further way of distinguishing itself, and that is that Shiso leaves can be either flat or ruffled. And when I mean ruffled, I mean ruffled like a petticoat at a square dance competition. Really, really, really ruffled. So ruffled. Well, most of you listening have seen Shiso because it's used to decorate a platter of sushi or sashimi. Have you ever seen an interesting leaf on your sushi platter?
Yes, I'm just sitting here thinking that's exactly what that was, and I didn't realize.
That's right. That was a Shiso leaf, and they usually use the ruffled one as decorative on those platters because it is very, very beautiful. And sometimes, like the coleus, which is also mint, it can be variegated, having both the green and the purple in rather subtle shades rather than just being all of one of those colors. Shiso, like the Tulsi, is native to India, and its range extends throughout Asia well into China. And in a way, I think of Tulsi and Shiso as sisters. The Tulsi is the one that's really focused on in India And the Shiso is the one that's more focused on in China. So I grew my Shiso seeds, and they grew up into beautiful, flat-leaved, dark purple plants. I was quite taken with them. Wasn't quite sure what to do with them, but I ate a little bit in my salads, and I thought, oh, this is an awfully good way to use these. And I didn't pick the top parts of them. I just picked the bottom leaves because I wanted them to flower and make seeds, and they did. And the next year, there's, I don't know, 4 or 5 or maybe even 10 times as much Shiso as I had had the previous year. My student had only sent me really a few seeds, and so I was glad to see that my Shiso patch was expanding. And year after year, so long as I was careful not to cut the tops of the Shiso off and to let it go to flower, the Shiso would dependably make seeds. Those seeds would fall out, land on top of the soil, where they would lay all winter getting cold and having the sunshine on them, and then grow again in the spring. Until someone came to do some work exchange here and thought that since it was a mint, the best thing was to cut all the flowering tops off of it. And then I had no more Shiso. I don't know if Shiso acts like a perennial in warmer climates, but certainly in our climate. As I said, it's very shy of the cold, and it drops its leaves, and it acts very much as an annual. But it is something that, because it drops those seeds and comes again, is almost a semi-wild plant, or like a perennial. It's certainly not the same plant that's coming back, but it feels like it, because you get the same Shiso growing in the same place year after year after year. There's not a lot of information out about Shiso, whereas there's a lot of information out about Tulsi. And very much like the Tulsi, Shiso is known to be a marvelous mint where it comes to improving breathing, but especially in countering allergies. Shiso is being looked at, especially throughout Asia, as a plant that can yield some interesting compounds to help people who are dealing with allergies and breathing difficulties. Reports of using Shiso, Perilla frutescens, both the leaf and the seed, in the treatment of asthma and inflammatory symptoms in the lungs go back hundreds and hundreds of years. Modern days experiments in vivo and in vitro have found that among 18 herbs that are said to counter inflammation, Shiso and ginger were the most active and the most effective in reducing inflammation. And it was found that both of these reduced inflammation by reducing the production and activity of a substance, TFN, which is linked with allergic inflammation. There's not just one, but many active components in Shiso that are linked with relieving allergies and relieving inflammation. Rosmarinic acid, remember that one from the Tulsi as well? L-lysine, apinine, caryophyllene, that was also in the Tulsi, myristine, beta-sitosterol, apigenin, phenylpropanoids, flavonoids, and luteolin, a carotene that has a very strong anti-allergic action. Not only is the perilla leaf usable in all of these ways, but the oil pressed from the seeds of the Shiso is rich in alpha-linolenic acid, which is used to treat allergies. And Shiso makes a lot of seed. So for many years, I didn't have any Shiso growing, and I missed it. And then I was asked by Johnny's Selected Seeds, a wonderful seeds place, to look over the list of herb seeds that they sold and make suggestions for other herb seeds that they might want to carry. It was a wonderful little one-time consulting job. I was very honored and very thrilled to have that job. And one of the herbs they didn't have that I suggested that they have was beefsteak plant, Perilla frutescens. And so I got some seeds as a part of a thank you for my job. And I was able to start growing the flat-leaved purple Shiso again. I've been growing that flat-leaved purple Shiso, and it's been self-sowing for over 10 years now. And a rather, to me, disturbing thing is happening. It's becoming more and more green. Year after year, more of the plants that come up from the self-sown seeds are green. I don't know if it's reverting back to green and that the purple is a more pushed form, but I really like the purple. I like the way it looks. I like the vinegar that I make of it. I like everything about the purple far more than the green. So one of the things that I did this year in an attempt to not have so much green Shiso next year was to harvest it in seed when the seeds were still green and make pesto from that green seedy part of the Shiso. And I was very excited then to find out that pesto may have a very strong anti-allergic action, and that I don't just have something that tastes really good and very nutty because, of course, it's seeds in my refrigerator, but something that could be a really excellent medicine as well. So that alpha-linolenic acid and a bunch of other compounds, very important and effective there. In a 3-week, double-blind, placebo-controlled study of 29 people with seasonal allergic rhinitis, that means their nose is stuffed up and red and running, participants were given either a placebo or a perilla extract enriched with 50 milligrams of rosmarinic acid or 200 milligrams of rosmarinic acid. And the results, the people taking the perilla and the rosmarinic acid had reduced symptoms, whether it was 50 or 200 milligrams of rosmarinic acid, and that was statistically quite significant than the change seen by the placebo takers. Animal studies have even found that Shiso can counter anaphylactic shock. This was most amazing to me. At this point, I have an herb, Usha, which is Ligusticum porteri, which I have used several times successfully to counter anaphylactic shock. And I've had quite a few dozen people tell me that they have used plantain leaf on a bee sting, although they know that they have a shock reaction to bee sting, and they do have their EpiPen at the ready, that the plantain has indeed successfully countered that. So this is well within the realm of possibility that it could indeed do that, and they found it effective against anaphylaxis from shellfish, peanuts, and bee stings. And that's rather interesting to me because the idea of using mints to help prevent food poisoning then takes on like a whole other cast, and that is that it may certainly help to prevent food poisoning, but it may help to prevent very strong reactions in people who were allergic to certain things like shellfish in a time when people didn't understand allergies in the way we do now. So the idea that it prevented food poisoning was probably right on several counts. There is some evidence, although it's pretty weak at this point, that suggests that Shiso may have anti-cancer effects. I suspect that is quite true, and may have benefits for those with autoimmune diseases, including autoimmune forms of rheumatoid arthritis. And so once again, we are looking at that idea of the adaptogen, the plant that helps us to adapt to whatever kind of life we are leading. In addition to, let's see, how have we used shiso at this point? I've mentioned that I put the fresh leaves in my salad. I've mentioned somewhat in passing that I make shiso leaf vinegar, which is just magnificent. I talked about making a pesto from shiso seeds, and we also make pesto from the shiso leaves as well. But what I have never done is to put shiso up my nose. Now, it turns out that if you are suffering a bout of allergic reaction to something, you are probably going to have an itchy nose and or a runny or a stuffed up nose. And what is being suggested is to put perilla up your nose. Well, not the fresh plant, some perilla oil or some perilla extract. I've never made a shiso tincture. Maybe next year I'll make a shiso tincture. And I've never made shiso oil. So perhaps I will try that as well. I have, however, made shiso honey, in which I take the fresh shiso, cut it up fairly fine, put it in a jar, and pour honey all over it. Let that sit for 6 weeks before I start using it. It can sit for years. It's a well-preserved form of the plant. And then that makes a really lovely tea. As a matter of fact, in most places, just before we move into winter, I suggest that people do this with many of their aromatic plants as they put them aside for the winter in the form of honeys. We can harvest our rosemary that way, our thyme that way, our sage that way. We talked about that in the first month that we were talking about the marvelous mints. But the shiso also makes a most delightful honey. And then a spoonful of the shiso leaves, which are still almost as though they were fresh there in the honey, and some boiling water. And like with the tulsi, there is this upliftment. I find it very interesting that these, of all of the mints that we have talked about, are the two that both come in both a green form and a purple form. And that they have this, almost this dual characteristic, so that they truly can touch all of the places that they need. Topical application of shiso has been found to be really excellent, especially in terms of people with acute dermatitis. Interesting study in which they had 100 children with atopic dermatitis, and they used a perilla cream. In other words, a cream made from shiso. So we'd start with the shiso oil, and then we could, to make a cream, traditionally water is mixed in with the oil. It's a tricky thing to do. And so you could probably use an ointment instead, which is just to mix some beeswax in with it. And in that case, what I would do is wet the skin first and then rub the beeswax solidified ointment into the wet skin. So 100 children with atopic dermatitis used perilla cream, and only perilla cream, for 3 months, and 80% of them showed improvement. There was less itching, there were fewer skin lesions, there were fewer eruptions. Some patients experienced effects just after they used it. In other words, they would put on the perilla cream and they would have less itching and less inflammation. And other patients found that the effects continued on, sometimes for as much as a whole day. Some patients found that the effects started almost immediately on using the cream, and others, in one case especially, it took up to 3 months before the effects were noticeable. There was a very small number of patients, about 2%, in other words, 2 patients out of 100, who thought that it made their symptoms worse, and so they discontinued the leaf of it, which is just fine. Perilla, unlike tulsi, is not really strongly scented. Now, I'm not saying it's not scented. Shiso is scented and has a wonderful scent, a rather unusual scent as well. It was very interesting reading various authors trying to describe the scent of shiso, and especially as they moved off into trying to distinguish between the scent of the green one and the scent of the purple one, which I'm sure one could, but I wouldn't want to try it blindfolded. because the scents are indeed very, very much alike. But the seeds, the leaves, and the stems of shiso do contain essential oils, although it's only about 0.5%. So not a very good yield. And so this oil of the shiso, unlike the oil of tulsi, is rarely used. In animal experiments, one of the constituents of shiso oil, B-caryophyllene, showed a relaxing action to the windpipe and a significant suppressing action to induced coughs. And this may indeed explain how it is that perilla is such an effective anti-cough and anti-asthma medicine. Shiso also contains a small amount of L-menthol, and that too has a non-inflammatory action and an anti-itching action, especially in allergic skin diseases. So tulsi, the sacred herb, and shiso, the sister herb, the secret herb. I think of that note that I got when I first encountered this herb. We use this herb to get through the long, hard winters. What an ambiguous and yet interesting thing to say. How do you burn it to stay warm? Do you stuff it in your pillow, right? Just that we use it to get through the winters, right? Do you chew it up and you have hallucinogenic effects? Right, as we come closer and closer to the end of our 20 weeks on the mints, I kind of am goading myself more and more to extend even by 1 or 2 more weeks and talk just a little bit about some of the psychoactive mints, because there are psychoactive mints, and although we have brushed elbows with them as we've been talking about the mints, a little focus might be in order. Due to the wide use of shiso in Asian cooking, as well as the prevalence of rosmarinic acid in so many of the mints which are used in cooking and food, it is assumed that shiso is absolutely safe and safe to use in any way. But I will tell you, the goats don't eat it. Now, this is an interesting thing. The goats will eat almost anything. The goats will eat raspberries. The goats will eat roses. The goats will eat things that are poisonous to us. I was out in the woods, and there's a very big poisonous plant out in the woods, and the goats ran right over to it and started eating it, and I'm screaming at them and trying to get them off, but they're just eating this poisonous plant. They did indeed throw up the next day, but it didn't kill them, and it probably would have killed a human being, especially if a human being had eaten as much of it as they had. So I'm pleased that the goats don't eat it. How wonderful, all the more for me. But at the same time, I'm a little worried, concerned. Do the goats know something I don't know? Here's what I found out. Perilla ketones can produce pulmonary edema and pleural effusion if the animals graze on the plants in the late summer or fall. Now, I'm going to take a wild imaginative leap here. Okay, it's not really that wild, and it's not really that imaginative, because I've seen similar things all over the world. Animals are put out onto pasture, whether it's sheep, cows, llamas, or water buffalo, and the animals eat everything there is in the pasture. They eat it right down to the ground, and they have been ignoring certain plants that they don't like shiso, or senecio, or even our friend hypericum. They just want to eat these plants, but then what happens? They get hungry. They get hungry, and they wind up eating a plant that they know they shouldn't eat, and then there is a problem. Affected animals show respiratory distress if they have been grazing on the plant, especially cattle and horses. They have difficulty breathing, especially when they are trying to exhale, and they often grunt When they exhale, there can be a nasal discharge, an elevated temperature. Friction sounds can be heard over the chest wall, and post-mortem examination reveals pulmonary emphysema and edema. And I thought to myself, what a homeopathic proving. And a homeopathic proving is that you give someone the actual poisonous plant in ever-increasing doses, not so much that you would kill them. You don't want to kill them. You just want to see what happens. Okay, if they have a little of it, they throw up. If they have more of it, then they can't stop throwing up, and so on, and so on, and so on. That's a homeopathic proving. And then what we believe in terms of homeopathy is that the things that the poisoning of the plant caused, the homeopathic remedy cures. So here we have Shiso, and we're being told this very important plant for pulmonary problems, and what happens to animals that eat it that shouldn't be eating it. They actually die of pulmonary emphysema. Plants are not either good or bad. It is our use of them and our understanding of them that helps us know whether they are going to help us or harm us. As I said, Corilla frutescens is used in Chinese medicine and has been used in Chinese medicine for a very long time, especially for things going on in the lung meridian and the spleen meridian. When there is wind cold, which manifests as fever, chills, headache, nasal obstruction, and cough, then Jiso is recommended, because the Chinese like to make herbal combinations and rarely use any herb by itself. In the wind cold type of common cold, the Shiso is combined with fresh ginger, tangerine peel, apricot seed, all of which you can get, and cyperus tuber, and if you can't get it, it's okay. Just go with what you have. Shiso is also used for qi stagnation in the spleen and the stomach, in which it can present itself as nausea, vomiting, or full sensation in the chest or abdomen. For a qi stagnation that is overcooling, Agastache, anise hyssop, another wonderful plant in the mint family, is used. And if there is overheating, then coptis root, a root that contains berberine, is used. If the qi is actually stagnant and has gotten all the way to the accumulation of phlegm, then magnolia bark added to the Shiso is said to really turn that away. The stem of the plant has been used in Chinese medicine for time immemorial in the treatment of morning sickness, and a woman who is pregnant who has been having morning sickness has some Shiso stalk by her bed. It makes a really big, tough stalk as it grows, not woody, but fairly big, so that she can chew on that whenever she wakes up in the morning. If there's vomiting during the pregnancy, then the Shiso with tangerine peel and ginger can be tremendously helpful. And crab and fish poisoning. Remember, we said that there is this idea that these plants help to prevent food poisoning. And especially, they say that the poisoning exhibits as vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. Then we probably could have food poisoning, and certainly shellfish, fish, and crabs can pass that, but we could also have an allergic reaction there. If the Shiso itself doesn't seem to be relieving it, try adding some fresh ginger root and some dongguai or angelica root and see if that does the trick for you. So, two from Asia, and The last 2 weeks of our month, we will have 2 from Europe and North America. So we'll get east and west here as we continue to look at the marvelous, marvelous mints. And I want to invite you all to come and visit me at SusanWeed.com or come to the Wise Woman Bookshop, where you will find all 5 of my books, as well as a lot of other interesting and fun things. And thank you. Thank you, Gemini. Thank you, listeners, for joining me. And once again, as we reweave the healing cloak of the ancients and reestablish herbal medicine as people's medicine.
Thank you, Susan. This concludes part 14 of our 20-part series, Marvelous Mints, The Wise Woman Way with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.